ultimately, is this ever an efficient way of trying to curtail what is ultimately an ability to make at home really advanced chips in China?
It's never going to be efficient. You know, let's not try to guess the ultimate goals of the U.S. policy. One effect likely, though, is that it will slow down China's ability to deploy really advanced chips for use in AI-oriented servers. So it will slow China down. You know, in the meantime, though, it's harmful to the U.S. companies that want to sell China those chips, you know, potentially like Nvidia. But fortunately, we're in a period of time when there's such strong demand for AI capabilities in servers that even if Nvidia loses some sales to China because of more restrictions, it'll likely be able to sell them in the United States or someplace else in the world. So it'll slow China down, but the horse has really left the barn in terms of the ability of China to ultimately produce advanced chips. They just can't do it in a lot of volume right now. But ultimately, over some years, you know, they'll be able to do this because chip technology, you know, has reached sort of the limits mostly of Moore's law, and so it's hard for, you know, our companies to stay ahead when all China has to do is copy what we've done so far.
JoAnne, good to see you. We were just showing the names, actually now moving to the upside. Nvidia and AMD on the GPU or graphics side, and then the chip equipment makers, Lam, KLA, also positive. You said that this won't slow China down, but there's a refocus on the chip equipment makers in particular. With those US-based companies with exposure to China, is this more of a concern now than it was to you yesterday?
Yeah, so, you know, we've been avoiding exposure to most of the equipment guys for a while because of these tensions with China. And so, you know, our position on that hasn't really changed. We have some selective exposure, but not to the major players like a Lam or Applied. And I think what happened earlier, right, when China saw this coming, you know, and saw the timing of these restrictions, they actually imported a boatload of equipment. So they're pretty well positioned. You know, again, it's going to slow them down in terms of deploying really high-end AI-based servers because they're not going to be able to get all those chips. But they have a lot of equipment from lithography out of, you know, the Netherlands from ASML to the etching machines to the deposition machines, right? So they can do an awful lot right now with the equipment that they have. There are always ways to get to smaller and smaller feature sizes, to those more advanced chips, using the older technology. It just takes many more steps to get there. It's much more expensive. So your question earlier, Ed, of is it efficient? It's not going to be efficient for China to make these advanced chips, but they're going to be able to make almost everything with the equipment they have, except for the very most advanced chips. And that's where U.S. policy, I think, wants to be binding. And it will be for a while until China can make further advances in their own deployment of equipment or refinement of the equipment that they already have in place.
Bloomberg's reporting that these expanded restrictions could come early this week. For what it's worth, the U.S. Commerce Department and National Security Council declined to comment on the story. But a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman called this the U.S. politicizing, instrumentalizing and weaponizing trade and tech issues. Our colleague Mackenzie Hawkins pointed out that this is not sort of an escalation from the U.S. It's a rethink of a year-long policy. Where do you stand on what this is or is not the U.S. doing?
So you're asking me to sort of put on a policy wonk hat. I'll do my best. I mean, clearly the U.S. wants to slow down China's ability to use AI and to develop AI applications, particularly in the military. And so to the extent that the U.S. can succeed in that by restricting their access to these most advanced chips and the equipment to make the most advanced chips, the U.S. will be successful. It's not the first time that trade policy has been used for things other than you know, tamping down illegal trade. I mean, clearly this is a political objective, not an unfair trade practices response. And so, you know, it's certainly not something that's probably authorized under WTO rules. Nevertheless, under national security reasons, clearly the U.S. is pursuing this strategy. And it will be effective. It'll just slow China down. But as many have been saying, and we have also, it's only going to accelerate China's own investments in developing their own capabilities. Now, we think they're a long way off from being able to replicate what ASML has done or what Lam has done. But again, by repeating the processes that the Intels and IBMs and Global Foundries and TSMCs of the world use, SMIC can get to pretty close to some of the most advanced chips, as they've shown in that Huawei chip, for example.
JoAnne, we ask you sometimes to put a policy hat on, and to that point, do you try and take that policy hat off when it comes to actually having exposure to such companies? You said how you've limited your exposure to chip equipment makers because of some of the issues with US and China. Well, what about an Nvidia that at the moment can sacrifice Chinese sales, but ultimately, do you want to be out of companies that have such exposure to China?
Yeah, no. So the investor hat, the portfolio manager hat, requires that you look at policy. Obviously, you need to handicap a little bit what is going to be in the U.S. interests, what they're going to try to do, as well as sort of the economic outlook. So at ACM, at Advisors Capital, what we do is both the top-down macro and political situation, and we then build up the bottom-up analysis of companies by company. So Nvidia is a great example. They have so many different opportunities because demand is so strong right now for AI capabilities in servers that we think if they lose a little bit from China, they'll be able to make it up elsewhere. It looks to us like they have kind of a waiting list, if you like, of companies that would like their most advanced chips. So, China could potentially hurt in the longer run if China is able to replicate the level and quality of chip that Nvidia could otherwise supply. But if they can't, and we don't think they'll be able to do that for some years, China's going to have to be satisfied with lower-end graphics chips out of the likes of Nvidia and AMD. So ultimately, we don't think there's going to be a big shift in spending by China. They're going to have to be satisfied with lesser chips, even more so than they were after last October's level of restrictions. And Nvidia will be able to sell, again, more of its ultimately higher-end chips to U.S. and European and other Southeast Asian customers.